I'm Mark Bentham.
And I'm Graham Nichols.
And I'm Katie Holloway, and you are listening to Ordinary. Hello, happy whatever day you're listening to this on.
Ooh, you sound like you're in a little echo chamber today, Katie.
It's because I'm in the fishbowl.
The fishbowl? Is that with the fishes next to you?
With
literally.
The fish.
You literally are in the fishbowl with a fisheye camera.
It's a bit, yeah, like that.
Curvy.
Anyway, how are you both?
Good, thank you.
What are you
Can't you
laughing?
answer for both of us? Well, because
Yes.
I normally answer for both of us, and I say we're fine.
We are
yeah.
both happily and
You have spent the morning together, I believe.
We have
so you
literally
probably...
spent the morning. Since 10 o'clock, we have hung out together.
What joy.
It has been. It's always good fun.
Good. I'm trying to detect sarcasm this time.
No.
No, none at all.
No.
Good. Well,
Well, where'd you go with
I've
that?
prepared zero banter, so should we just get on with it? Or have you got any fun facts you'd like to share?
Yes, because we are a Bantasauruses. That's a...
No, but if anyone did actually play the bingo, I am going on a train tomorrow, and the weather is very pleasant today.
Oh, yeah.
And it's nearly
very
Christmas,
pleasant.
isn't it?
It is. Well, we were doing some Christmas planning, which cheered Mark up this morning.
Oh, love. We've got some cracking ideas this year. I'm really excited.
Well, I see what you did there with crackers.
Crackers, yeah.
Are they going to be crackers?
Well, you never
Yes,
know.
there are. In the gingerbread thing, there's going to be Graham crackers.
Oh, yeah.
Or Graham
different
biscuits,
kind
anyway.
of crackers. It's an American.
Oh, like what they call graham crackers.
Yeah, because they can't quite say Graham, bless them.
Is it spelt like Graham?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Graham.
Graham.
Oh,
Yeah.
fun. Well, there we are.
There we go. Woo,
I can't
check
remember
out
what goes
Banter
on the
app.
bingo now, so I can't on purpose put any in there. But
Yeah, we can't sip tea, but because I haven't got any.
No,
But yeah,
neither.
they are genuinely called Graham crackers. Yeah, and it is
But your
genuinely
homework
just.
for next week is to look up why they're called Graham crackers. Are they named after a
Graham.
famous Graham?
The Graham.
Yeah, there's not very
You,
many.
perhaps.
I think I was named after. There was
The
a.
crackers. Your mum and dad love the crackers.
Well,
They thought,
that's cheered
this
you
is
up.
great. Yeah.
I think I was named after. Was there a racing driver called Graham Hill? Maybe I was named after him or something. I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe it was just a popular
My
name.
brother's called Graham.
Yeah, but he's a bit of a late Graham. There's not that
Yeah,
many
he is.
Grahams that are that much
No.
younger.
Well, all the like proper traditional names are coming back in now, aren't they?
What?
Like I heard somebody had a baby a couple of weeks ago called her Betty, and I just thought it was wonderful. Like, what a lovely name! Like, lots of the traditional names are coming back, but
Indeed.
I don't think feel like it's going to be another cycle before like Graham and Keith and those types of names start to creep in.
thanks.
But they'll come around again.
Yeah.
What about Gertrude?
Yeah, I haven't met any.
Gertie.
Yeah, I haven't
Well-
met a Gertrude ever actually. So
No.
apologies if you called Gertrude and I've forgotten. There we are. Now we're all cheered up. Let's talk about depression. Last week we did anxiety. Thought it'd be good to tackle this as well. I guess it's another one that we kind of haven't really delved into. It feels like too big and weighty a topic to tackle in a podcast, but we'll give it a go. I think we did well with anxiety last week. So if you haven't listened to that, give it a listen. 'Cause I think it was really helpful. But we'll find out, I guess. So I guess last week we talked about anxiety, and we kind of said it could be viewed as kind of a spectrum where probably everybody's on it somewhere. Do you think we can say the same with depression? Could that be some kind of spectrum where, one end of it might be I'm sad sometimes, and then the other end is this kind of I feel completely awful or completely numb and all the time and can't get out of bed. Do you think that could be a true thing to say, or do you think depression's different? It's something else.
I think that will be true.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a spectrum, yes. I think it's more than I just feel sad. So I think it's not to the extent where we all feel anxious or we all feel sad. I think it's more than that. But there is certainly a scale of spectrum which we probably all experience periods of lowness, because I think it's more than just a feeling at one particular point. It's a period of lowness, which might be caused by a situation, it might be caused by a season, it might be caused by a sense of discontentment on the less severe side, moving towards the major, the more severe clinical major depression episode.
I was just going to say, with all mental illness, there's probably for every word you might use to describe some kind of mental persistent struggle, there is a kind of an ordinary version of it. If someone, Mark was mentioning OCD a bit last week. If someone suffers with OCD, everyone can say, to some degree, might get a little bit obsessive every now and then about whether I've locked the car, and so there is a spectrum, and that will be true of anxiety, certainly, that we talked about last week. That will be true of depression. I mean, Mark's studied it more than I, but it is one of those things which tends to get diagnosed by a collection of persistent symptoms rather than by a sort of binary. You got this, and this, so you're depressed. Yeah. It's a collection of sort of things you could tick the box for, but the severity of those things as well, and the persistence of those things, and the accumulation of all of them, a good proportion of them, where you could say, well, someone's moved into being what you might describe as depressed, as a sort of settled position, rather than, they're depressed today because it's their birthday and there's no one around, or it's their birthday and a loved one that they used to have around is not around. You might say, well, that person is pretty depressed for the days leading up to and the days following that. You sympathise with that, but you probably wouldn't say they are in a settled position of being depressed. They still have lots to think about and deal with, but it's not the same as being in that settled position. But how would you define it, Katie?
I don't know. I do think it's different to sadness, I expect. But yeah, I don't know.
From your experience with sort of people that you have known, what do you observe in it that's different to someone you could say, well, that person is depressed, as opposed to the one who's not suffering with? Sorry, this is not the purpose of the podcast, is not to put you on the spot. You're supposed to put us on the spot.
Exactly so. I don't know, I guess clinically there's all these check boxes, aren't there? Like, for the last 2 weeks, have you? And it's things like losing interest in things, that kind of thing. But I suspect it's you can't talk in generalities, but generalities, because everybody's different, aren't they? But I suspect it tends more to be perhaps a lack of feeling rather than a feeling of sadness. And probably everybody, I imagine, can pinpoint times when they felt that kind of, I just feel a bit bleh. But maybe that just persistent numbness, I'm not excited about anything, and I'm not even terribly sad about anything. I wonder if that might be more of what we might categorise as a depression. I don't know.
Well, I think what you're trying to do is the sense of what might be defined as a clinical depression or a major depressive episode over the kind of severe, just a period of lowness, and which they would be categorised very differently. So the tick box would help you to get to the more major depression, the kind of clinically depressed, that kind of definitive. But someone else, you can go through a couple of weeks where you lose your appetite, you feel you're grieving the loss of a loved one. You're going to feel a sense of being depressed. There's a lowness, there's a lack of appetite, maybe you're unable to sleep, maybe you lack enthusiasm for anything. That I think that's where we're trying to be careful, is we recognise that would be a period, and it may be because of a particular situation, the death of a loved one. It may be because of particular pressure coming at you, but at some point that then triggers into what would be classed as clinical depression or a major depressive episode, and they are very specifics in terms of what a doctor would deal with. And of course, that line is not so clear, but there are some things that will just tip it over into that.
Yeah. Do you think the labeling it or these kinds of feelings or experiences as depression is helpful or unhelpful?
Well, it's helpful in the sense of what all of the kind of labels for any of these kind of any mental health struggle. What the labels do is really they describe what's going on. So any of the diagnostic, the DSM in the US is the big one, but over here I can't remember what it is. In the sense of what they're really good at is they're giving you descriptions of what is going on. They're not kind of, and therefore they're helpful in that sense because they give a name to how one is feeling and how one is and what one is experiencing. So sometimes that's really helpful because if you're depressed and you're kind of wondering why am I feeling like this, and someone says actually you actually got depression. Here's how it's seen because actually you hit all of these kind of labels. It can give a sense of okay, that explains what's going on. The danger is when the label is then used in an unhelpful way, whereby it just becomes used to kind of define people as depressive. That that's it, and you're kind of written off as that is your identity now. You're depressed. You're an OCD sufferer. You're an anxious, and that's where the labels are unhelpful because it labels defines someone in that category, but the labels in themselves are helpful because they're describing what's going on. And that's all the labels do generally. The labels are just descriptive. They're not really definitive of why what's going on or what's happening. They're more in that label, that area, based on observations.
I wondered if somebody's given, say, you're depressed, then they might feel as though, I can't feel happy then, I'm not allowed to. Or 2 days later, a doctor might diagnose that maybe. And then 2 days later, they might find themselves laughing at something and think, I'm not allowed to because I'm depressed. Or, but then another side of that could be potentially, and I want to say it carefully, but using that then as an excuse not to do things or to act a certain way. I'm depressed, I can't do X, Y, and Z. And I think there probably are times when that is true, but I don't know. I've just wondered if a label can drag somebody down a bit more rather than help them out of it. But I guess it could be argued either way.
Yeah. I'm with both of you that the label can be helpful. I think whether it is an excuse, but certainly some kind of, I don't know what you might call it, a sort of protection shield sometimes it's used as a way of stopping people maybe speaking into it or explaining or excusing certain behaviours or lack of responsiveness, those sort of things.
Yeah.
And it's really hard, isn't it? Because it's not like a broken leg where that there's not really a dispute. I mean, obviously you can pretend to have a broken leg, but generally speaking, it's a fairly well-established fact. Whereas with depression, because it is to some degree a set of symptoms, and the degree of those symptoms is not always sort of clearly understood by everybody, there's the danger that you have sort of false positives, but you also have people who are not sure whether you're sort of being truthful about it, and so or they don't understand it, and so they speak into it unhelpfully. So I think it's like with a lot of mental illness, it's much harder to deal with than very straightforward clinical things. Because although you call it clinical depression, it's not exactly clinical in a sort of biological processes sense. It's much more complex.
Yes,
than
there's
that.
not a blood test for it that says, "Oh, yes, you've got it." No, you haven't.
Yeah,
go on. Well, I was going to say.
I was going to say, and you were going to say. Why don't you say what you're going to say first, because then I'll hold mine.
Well, all I was going to say is interesting. Out of all, I think, of the mental health, the only one that actually is definable and can be seen by scans and is kind of rooted in a kind of a physiological difference is actually Alzheimer's. Yeah. So Alzheimer's is the one where they can categorically say, yes, you have that because we can see what is called build-up of plaques in the brain that cause Alzheimer's. And this is the only one out of all of them where you can physiologically see it. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't brain patterns that are going on in all of those, but it just means that actually in terms of diagnosing, there's only one where you can actually run a scan and see it. Everything else is defined by what has been observed over many years and then kind of experienced in that way, which then does mean that there is some kind of scope in that.
It feels quite hard, I think, to talk about depression. I think probably generally, but I think specifically amongst Christians, it feels like often feels like an elephant in a room or something that people want to avoid talking about. Like there might be a taboo over it. Why do you think that is? Why is there maybe a stigma or something in Christianity or within the church to do with depression?
I think sometimes there's the fear of not fear of the unknown. If you haven't experienced it, there is a fear of not fear of the unknown, but a fear of either the fear of stepping into and sort of being really clumsy and saying the wrong thing into it. There's a sort of, at the other end of the spectrum, perhaps the bad end, is a sort of cynicism about it and whether they really are depressed or not. So I think both of those kind of provoke a lack of engagement. And even if you do engage, there's always a danger the person who's depressed feels like they're not being engaged with very well, because I think it's in a way it's part of the condition that there's you feel quite unique in it, and that no one understands you, or very few people who've actually experienced it could understand you. So I think those conversations can be difficult, which is perhaps why we avoid them at times.
I think it's also how it's been set up in our culture.
Yeah. So
we live in a very medical-driven culture. Therefore, anything like depression, anxiety, actually what we've done is sectioned it off and said, okay, that's the medical world, that's the NHS. The church doesn't have a role to speak into it. And attached to depression is a shame, because we think, well, we shouldn't be depressed, we're Christians. But it's a medical condition, so I don't share all my medical conditions, so I'm not going to share this. Yeah. So I think, and there's this kind of false kind of divide that says that's the medical, which doesn't actually happen a lot in other cultures. You know, if you in the US, often a lot of this would be dealt with because of the counselling culture in the US. Actually, there's a lot more counselling done and often done within churches. So therefore, it would be expected to be talked about. There would be whereas we have kind of pushed that all out. And it's as if the church deals with the kind of spiritual issues, sin, we deal with death, we deal with burials, marriages, we can talk about those kind of things. And of course, what we're really good at is if you get cancer, we'll do the great care of, we'll draw alongside, we'll pray with you. But when it comes to these kind of issues, this isn't our world, it's out there. And therefore it kind of just makes it much more, this isn't the church's area, this isn't something we talk about as Christians. Christians shouldn't expect to struggle in this way. All of those kind of things, these lies that are told, then makes it feel like this isn't something we do.
So what might be? Let's just delve into it. What might be some different causes of depression? You've kind of hinted at a couple of things. Was that a bad question? Like, is that not the question to ask?
Well, in a sense, I think there are things that cause it. I think it's harder to work out cause and effect, actually, because if you give one person a set of circumstances, they may become depressed. You give another person exactly the same life experience and they're not depressed. So it's not then so straightforward. I suppose it's like saying if you get so much of our friend the COVID virus, some people will suffer very badly with the illness and some people might resist it entirely and get over it. But I think with depression even more so, its causes are either complex or sometimes unknown, and sometimes we need to get underneath the way we're coping with things rather than the things themselves. So it may be a bereavement, or it may be loss of job, or it may be not being married or being married, or feeling a burden, or feeling no one cares about you, or getting to a particular stage of life and having a sort of persistent fear about it. It may be spiritual depression in the sense of being worried about your own assurance of being secure in Christ, but it may be also depression because nothing you do seems to work, and your kids are not saved yet, and you see the prosperity of the wicked all around you, and you're depressed because of that. You've lost your hope in God. So I think there's all those things sort of going on, whether they're exactly causes, but they're all sort of mixed up together, aren't they? Yeah. And I think it's trying to help people how to cope with those things rather than necessarily saying that caused it. So that's the thing, because you can't always get rid of the things.
It's worth, recognizing that the world would say it's biological.
Yeah.
So generally how lots of the world would understand these things. These are biological reactions within us, the chemical imbalances, there's brain patterns that is happening. And that could well be true. It's just very hard to demonstrate it. So in other words, no one actually knows the real reason of why someone, a individual, and you may never know the reasons. You may be able to look, and as Graham said, gave all those really helpful reasons that could possibly, but it's very hard to say that particular brought. You may get there. The world wants to say it's all about biological, which is why the world then just medicates. The world and medication's good. We'll talk about that. Medication's not bad, but the world's thinking this is all biological, and we want to say I'm not sure that's right. I think a lot more going on, which is what Graham was hinting at. So events happen to us. How I then interpret those events, internal beliefs that I have, that I hold to, expectations. Things that I can change, things that just come at me, all of those things are going on that then may create depression or compound the depression and kind of create it. Alongside, there may be a biological thing that's going on. Now, no one knows whether the event, the heart reaction, then causes the chemical imbalance, which is why medication helps, or chemical balance helps, which is why I then can't, and no one can tell you. The world will tell it's all biology, but actually no one can there's no scientific, because as I said, there's no scan, there's no kind of readout they can do. They observe this is what happens, but no one can tell you which one comes first.
Yeah. So how is the depressed person to blame for how they feel? I guess that's no. But how can we help? Because I think a person who's feeling depressed will, I think, feel quite guilty for it and feel that they're to blame for it. And then there's this weird thing going on, I think, when a person's depressed, that the depression kind of has a filter over your thoughts. So you can't necessarily think clearly and rationally, but you will always think this is my fault, or they think it's my fault, or I'm causing problems, I'm a burden. All of those kinds of things will tend to filter even the kind of the true and the good things, leading to that person then feeling quite guilty. So you might say, there's a number of things that can cause it, and maybe it's a discontentment, or maybe it's a disbelief in this part of the gospel or something like that. But that, I think, can often filter through to sound like this is my fault. So how can we kind of counter that kind of thinking? So not just to heap guilt on top of this already not feeling good person. Nobody knows.
I think the it's a bit like when we were talking about anxiety last week. The guilt sin thing is again complex in that the predisposition is not sinful, and there are many elements of it that you could say, well, we're not culpable for. But there's likely to be sin in the way we respond to things, whether with anxiety last week or in depression, or maybe not the depression itself, but the way we're reacting to the depression. Not the fact that we're depressed, but the way we're reacting to the depression, or the way we're reacting to certain things, or the way we're viewing things, where there may be elements of sin in, there may be elements that are in a way outside of our control, but we still have some degree of agency. And I don't think it's helpful to really be hard and fast about this is sin and this is okay. but more to think as a whole, where am I? What am I believing? What am I doing to act on those beliefs? How am I trying to grow my trust in the sovereign providence of God and the love of Christ and the eternal perspective? What am I doing in those areas, rather than precisely to sort of forensically diagnose, okay, this part of my depression is sinful and this part is not. This part I can feel guilty for, but this is just me. I don't think it really takes you anywhere, very useful. But thinking, what am I doing with it, and how am I trying to deal with it, and who am I looking for counsel from? What steps am I taking, both medically, but particularly with my spiritual friends? So I think that's more helpful. So guilt per se, I don't think takes us very far. Do you think, Mark?
No, I agree, and I think in one sense, it's Mike Emlett's really helpful. He always talks about, we're always sufferers, we're always saints, we're always sinners. So as we meet with believers, firstly and foremost, depression is suffering. So they're suffering. They're in pain. They're finding life hard. There's a suffering reality to it. We're laughing because the Zoom has obviously got some AI thing that has picked up the fact that I've put my thumbs up.
Oh, is that what that is?
It's created a bubble.
Doesn't do it on mine.
That's astonishing, isn't it? Which is why I had bubbles and balloons last week, because obviously I spoke about parties or something. So the reality is that I'm a sufferer first. So I want to align people back with their relationship with the Lord, firstly, rather than talking about guilt. That actually that they're struggling. The Lord understands this. There's a battle going on. There's a spiritual warfare going on at this point. But at the same time, and connecting to the fact that they're a saint, they're loved, and then we want to start getting to the sin. Because the truth is although we talk about all these reasons of why, the reality is an event or an episode isn't sufficient on its own to cause depression. Okay, just because I'm faced with death, that doesn't. What causes it is the relationship between that event and how my heart is relating to that event. Now, it may not be that I'm sinning per se in that, but how I'm responding to that, my understanding of the event, how I'm interpreting it, what I'm believing or not believing. Sometimes that's sinful. Sometimes it's just maturity, a range of reasons, maturity of faith. I haven't quite understood how this works out in the Christian life. So I've misunderstood something but whatever it is, those two combinations. So therefore, at that point, we do want to explore what's going on in the heart. What is it revealing? Which is why you never want someone just kind of going to the doctor, having medication and thinking that's the issue, because the meds might give them a bit of a lift, but they've not dealt with the reason that actually caused it in the first place. And trying to understand what have I misunderstood? What have I kind of internally thought, or what's going on in my heart? That's not to condemn someone, because they may not be doing anything wrong in the sense of actively sinning, but helping them to understand, because depression, like all these things, gives us a window into our hearts and an opportunity to deepen our relationship with the Lord. So we want to be doing that work and not thinking, okay, depression, I'm just feeling a bit low, I'll get some tablets and I'll be okay. We've missed an opportunity to grow in our relationship as those who are loved by the Lord.
Is there a sense that we could aim to be depressed well? Like you hear, tales of Christian heroes and ministers and hymn writers and things who have suffered depression, but seem to be quite faithful in it. So is there a sense that, a person who's feeling depressed could say, yes, I am feeling depressed or am clinically depressed. This is my state, but I'm going to do so faithfully. And what might that look like? Absolutely.
As you mentioned, some of the godliest people around have struggled and still do, wrestled with depression. And it's hard. And again, it's remembering we're sufferers, saints, and sinners. So I can suffer well as a saint, and I'm still going to be a sinner in there. I'm still going to get things wrong, but that's okay. And a lot of the time, it's just encouragement. Are you faced in the right direction? In some days, actually, just persevering, just the fact that actually you managed to get up and, even just pray for a minute, that is spiritual work in, the day that you get back to church, that's the massive win. So actually just the direction one has faced is gonna make a difference here. And having people around us who encourage us to see where the God's Spirit's at work, because we're not going to see it when we're in the darkness, when we're in the pit, and it's going to feel. But I think that trajectory, and then just begin to allow God's word to speak, to shape. Trying to cling on to the Lord in the midst of it, even when I don't feel the Lord. That's the key, because I don't necessarily feel the Lord, but I'm going to cling on in faith that says, okay, I can't feel this. I'm going to use those psalms that just speak of that, how long, O Lord, that darkness, that despair. The Bible understands this. So even if I'm doing that in small steps, I'm beginning to do this. I'm beginning to handle this in a very different direction as an unbeliever. And we're not going to get it all perfectly right, and there are going to be days of utter despair. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm not doing it well, because again, we could add burden and guilt to us. But seeing those small steps, seeing that actually we're facing the right direction, seeing actually just crying out to the Lord, how long, is an attitude of a believer, not an unbeliever.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So what pictures does the Bible give us of depression? Where, do we see models of it? Do we see characters wrestling with it?
Yeah, whether you could
I think
say
the answer is yes.
Well, whether you could say Saul was depressed, and when he was being comforted by David and the harp playing and so forth, he was certainly, I would say, a little bit bipolar, Saul. But there are plenty of psalms that express being downcast. I would make a distinction between, well, not a distinction so much, but a caution about attributing depression to people who are struggling in the Bible, and this is sometimes with actual situations where you could say, well, they're not depressed, they're just sad because something is sad. Yeah. Is Jeremiah writing Lamentations depressed? I mean, he spends chapter after chapter moaning and bewailing, and he feels absolutely wretched. And you may learn lessons about how he needs to trust God's mercy new every morning, and remember God's faithful, and wait on the Lord, and all those things. So there are great lessons for depression in it, but it's not as simple as saying he was depressed. Oh, isn't that good? Here's an example of someone who's clinically depressed. He's lamenting what's happened in the judgment of Israel, and I think that will be true of some of the Psalms. So I think there's some great lessons about being sad with cause that we can perhaps apply to being sad, maybe sometimes without cause, but the cause being our depression, or responding to situations that make us sad, which we can learn from the Psalms or Lamentations or other places. Even Paul saying, "What a wretched man I am," when he's sort of struggling with his sin. Yeah. Whether you could draw a straight line to depression, I think is harder. Again, Mark's the expert, so he may have thought of this more. But there's a caution to always say these people are depressed. People talk about Elijah being depressed on Mount Carmel sometimes, and I kind of think, well, I'm not sure he was depressed. I think he was.
I think he was hungry.
He was hungry, and he was spiritually depressed, but there were actually some things that were quite against him. Jezebel was after him and all those sort of things. And so he needed reorientating, but whether he was clinically depressed is a different thing. So I think you draw the lines faintly and carefully, but you take the spiritual principles and say, yeah, this really applies to depression, whether I'd call this person depressed. Yeah, sure. So I got quite into that because I've thought that particular thing through a little bit.
Yeah, helpful.
Is Mark going to say something? You look like you're about to, but
no. I think I agree. I think it is hard to say. I think they show elements of depressive behaviour, whether they are clinically depressed, but they are facing, and there is a period of what seems like darkness, and they're wrestling with where the Lord is in the midst of it. In that sense, they have an experience of depression, and how they respond to that, and how the Lord speaks into that is therefore helpful to us.
Yeah, I was thinking about Job actually, and again, probably not depression how we would say it today.
I don't know. It may well have been.
What's that?
He may well have been.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was definitely cause.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like so much suffering. But his beliefs are a bit wrong, I think, at times. But he does keep looking to God, and actually he's a bit angry with God, and I don't think he speaks to God that well at times. But he is always. You might disagree with me. Maybe I misread it, but sometimes I think, "Oh, would you say that to God?" But he does, but he always says it to God. And and his friends, he's not afraid to rebuke his friends and say, "No, God is, God is faithful. I'm not." Because his friends are quite keen to rebuke him and tell him off that he's done something wrong, and he says, "No, I have. This has just happened, but God's." He keeps trusting in God and his promises, even though they feel quite far away to him.
Yeah, I think Job is actually a better example where the lines are a bit stronger than fainter in the connections, because it is with cause, but it's also he's in the spiritual battle of wondering why, and he's also suicidal potentially suicidal at times, because he says, "I wish I'd never been born." So he loses perspective on his life. So he shares maybe a few more characteristics with the kind of contemporary depression, as we would define it by the sort of characteristics. So I think he shares, but I think he's good. He's a good example in terms of the struggle. He's probably more consistently faithful than some people who are struggling with depression. So that's helpful in drawing lessons. Where exactly you land him in terms of what he's doing, there's loads of lessons for people facing depression or responding badly to depression, because he's responding in a mixed way to his circumstances, but he doesn't curse God, but he raises questions. And people who are depressed, like people who are suffering in other ways, always have the question, why is this happening to me? Or why is this happening to me now? Or why is this happening to me to this degree? Or why is this happening to me compared to other people?
Yeah.
Those are good lessons for suffering in general, but they work well with depression as well.
Yeah. So what if someone's listening and they are feeling depressed, or like they might be depressed? What might be a good first step for them? Like what would you encourage them to do first?
Speak to someone. Speak to a pastor, speak to an elder, speak to a trusted friend, seek out a biblical counsellor. Probably they will get you to get a check-up with the GP first, just to see if there's anything that can be done there as well. And just then begin to talk and try and work out, get support, get help, and don't fight it on your own. Would be the starting place, and recognise this is a spiritual, so crying out to the Lord, but recognising actually, there is wisdom within the church, because there's wisdom within God's word that can speak into these situations. Often
starting doesn't have to be, I'm depressed, so I'm going to go and ask for help with my depression. It may be that that's not a useful word. It may be that you just need to talk to someone because you're feeling sad, angry, confused, low, even despairing of life because of a set of things that are happening, or because of no reason at all. And you just want to go and express that, rather than feel that it's such a high bar, because it might put someone off talking to someone else, because they think, well, I need to go and talk to someone if I'm depressed, but I'm not sure if I'm depressed. Just go and talk to someone anyway, even if you're feeling sad, even if you don't think it's a structural problem with you, but it's just a good discipline to make ourselves accountable in terms of some of our feelings, and test those.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of this. So beginning of term, I said to my community group, I think I said to Sasha, I said, I'm just feeling really low beginning of term. Was I depressed? Probably not. But I was wrestling with, I was just feeling low. I wasn't excited by the term ahead. And my community group prayed for me, particularly for help in terms of just lowness, just in the sense of just all that was happening. A couple of weeks later, someone said to me, we prayed for you, Mark, how are you feeling? I said, you know what? There were a lot of things that changed in that week after we prayed. And actually that just brought about, a change in how I was, my attitude. I wasn't, so just a very, very small situation, but actually expressing it and asking for prayer, the Lord answered it through his people and through other events that then took place that then began to change. So I think that, that just echoing what Graham's saying there, even just saying, look, I'm just fine, I'm just feeling low, I'm just struggling right now, can you pray for me? And, what's going on? Well, I've got this, and people then pray into that. Actually can think, now that's not, immediately going to change someone who's wrestling with deep depression, but it's the starting point for all of us, is asking for that help.
And perhaps starting there rather than, I better wait until it gets X bad before, and maybe it might actually stop, stop
absolutely.
it getting that, if you can kind of, I mean, maybe not, but maybe. So what?
Go on.
I was going to move on to a different question.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, I will. What can we do if somebody comes to us and says, I'm feeling depressed or just feeling low? Like, what are good ways to support each other? Maybe like what are some things not to say?
It's a bit of a cliche, but don't say you just need to cheer up.
Pull your socks up.
That's a bit like saying calm down to somebody who's very stressed. It's never going to work.
Yeah. I don't think anyone says quite as simple as that. But I think, of course, in the end, that is our destination, isn't it? That we want people to cheer up in the Lord by gaining proportion and perspective on things in this life, particularly informed by the gospel. So we do want them to cheer up, but we recognise the weakness. I think always acknowledging, making sure you really understand what someone's saying rather than immediately sort of step in to fix it. You need this 5-step plan to make you better, but giving lots of time to listen, to play back, to make sure you've understood those sort of things, and to reassure of prayer and sympathy, and to express that and to actually pray where we've said we've prayed. And then there's all the other good things that Mark's going to talk about.
Well, I was going to say, some of the things not to say is don't go on a sin hunt. Don't immediately assume that there's some sin here that needs to be dealt with. That's really unhelpful. I think some of the kind of worldly phrases, or just love yourself more, lower your expectations, you've a right to be angry. Sometimes we can affirm what they're doing without really understanding why it's happening. And actually their actions may not be right at that point, but I need, as Graham said rightly, to listen, to hear, to take time to sometimes we can over try. Actually you just need to listen and to pray and to walk with. There'd be some things not to.
Perhaps maybe avoiding comparison to other situations. A thing not to do or say.
Don't play spiritual top trumps. I was depressed. When I was depressed, it was like this. That there's time to share our stories and testimonies. Probably not straight away. So someone says I'm depressed, and I go, I was depressed. When I was depressed, you don't feel loved.
Sure. Okay. So are there any helpful books or resources we would point?
Katie, I'm glad you asked.
Thought you would be.
Thank you very much. I think the best, most helpful resource is probably Ed Welch's Depression, A Stubborn Darkness. I think that's really helpful. It's really helpful that you can read if you are depressed, or to read it with a friend, alongside a friend who is depressed. It's short chapters, helpful reflection questions, helpful in that sense. Zach Eswine's Spurgeon's Sorrows, very small book, packed full. Coming at it, similar vein, some other ideas, kind of thinking what Spurgeon did, some kind of naturalistic ideas that he had. Spurgeon used to take 3 months off rest in holidays, but that's not always feasible.
But he wasn't a mum.
But he was.
He was a smoker as well.
He was a smoker, cigar smoker. So, but some really helpful things there about thinking about how the Lord connects in those ways. And there's one by Mark Maynell. I think there's a helpful one, which is more of a British flavour. When Darkness Seems My Closest Friend, Reflections on Life and Ministry, Depression. This one, Chris Silaponi, Down Not Out, which talks about depression, anxiety, and the difference Jesus makes. Again, helpful guy who himself just had a bit of a breakdown, depressed, anxious. Really helpful books on it.
The Lloyd Jones book on spiritual depression, a bit of an old classic, but it is good. It probably doesn't engage with the kind of modern categories of depression and the psychological, but I think it's helpful to get more of a perspective that's kind of lurching sounds bad, but moving much more towards the spiritual causes and cures. And it kind of assumes there might be something else going on elsewhere, but that's a good read.
And the CCEF website or the Biblical Counselling UK website has lots of helpful resources.
Cool. I think that's us. If you are listening and you want some help, you can email us. We can point you somewhere. Or your church leader. We are ordinary@cchh.org.uk. We are your only friends. I'm sure we're not, but that's it. All right, we'll see you next time. You've been listening to Ordinary, the podcast seeking to help ordinary Christians live for Christ in everyday life. If you found this helpful, please do share with a friend. Come and find us on social media. We'd love to have you join our conversations. You can find us on Twitter @OrdinaryCCHH, on Instagram @OfficialOrdinaryPodcast, and on YouTube @OrdPod. That's ORDPOD. Or you can email your comments or questions to ordinary@cchh.org.uk. We'll see you next time.